Homing bracket!
What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is obviously part 4 of my attempt of ranking every single Best Picture winner, a free-for-all, so to speak, all 93 Best Picture winners. Obviously, I've done 3 other parts. This is the final part. This is number 25 to 1. So a little bit of backstory if you haven't seen the other 3 parts. I'm not going to be going too in-depth with each entry. That's simply just because I've talked about these movies in depth in my ranking of each decade. You can check that out down below. It's essentially where I have each decade, like the example, the 1940s, and I ranked all 10 Best Picture winners of said decade, from 10 being worst to 1 being best. So that was obviously confined to that decade, but this is every single Best Picture winner piled together, and obviously these are the final 25. Now these final 25, they are all pretty much, in my eyes, great to masterful. So all that exposition aside, let's get started, guys, with number 25, which number 25 is Lawrence of Arabia. Truth be told, when I saw Lawrence of Arabia, I've only seen it once. I thought it was just solid, but I do want to rewatch it, and I just can't help but think about that cinematography and that beautiful score. I'm looking forward to rewatching it, and that's why it's so high up on this list, because, I haven't seen it quite a while, like 7-8 years, but I just can't help but think about it, Like, I'm looking forward to rewatching it. That's why it's number 25. Next up, number 24 is The Best Years of Our Lives. I've only seen it once, and I'll never forget this movie. This movie was really impactful for me as a young film buff. So, yeah, it's number 24. Next up, number 23 is The Apartment, which I really dig this movie, man. Jack Lemmon's one of my favorite actors. He's great in this movie. He kills it. He nails the role. Shirley MacLaine's also great. The chemistry between these two is great. And honestly, for its time period, it was very groundbreaking, and it holds up very well today. So, yeah, that's why it is my number 23. Next up, number 22 is On the Waterfront, which, to be honest, it's a sin that I don't own this on physical media. Probably going to be buying it up next for the next Criterion Haul, because this is a really good film. It's very, very well made, and honestly, it's one of the best entries of the 1950s filmmaking. It's great. And yeah, that's why it's my number 22. Next up, number 21 is The Sting, which I don't own it on Blu-ray, and truth be told, I am so glad that I kept on putting it off because of how expensive it was, because it just was announced recently that The Sting is going to be hitting 4K. So yeah, I'm going to be buying it on 4K. I'm very excited. I like this movie. This movie, honestly, is very clever, and I love the twist at the end. It's really good, man. But yeah, that's my number 21. Next up, number 20 is The Shape of Water. I love this movie, man. Guillermo del Toro did such a great job with this movie. I could talk about this movie all day, but I'm not going to. But I love it. I love this movie. So yeah, that's my number 20. Next up, my number 19 is The Departed. It's funny. I remember the first time I saw The Departed, I was like, oh, Infernal Affairs is better. But truth be told, Infernal Affairs I've only seen once. The Departed I've seen almost a dozen times. I love this movie. I really do. It's really grown on me. Definitely one of Scorsese's best, in my opinion. Obviously, I own the triple pack, but I love The Departed. So yeah, it's my number 19. Next up, number 18 is Midnight Cowboy. This movie is so good. It's crazy because this movie, when it came out, obviously it was kind of like taboo, but this movie, when it came out, it was just kind of like put in theaters. It was looked at as like a mainstream movie, but this movie came out today. This would be like one of those movies that, is considered an art house movie, and that would have, been made for like $1 million, and it probably would have only made like $200,000. Simply just because, it's a film that, for its time, it's kind of crazy that it's a time capsule of said time. But even now, more so, it's more relevant than ever. And honestly, it's one of those movies, too, that's aged like a fine wine. I love the filmmaking of this movie, man. It's really good. I'm looking forward to watching it many more times. I've seen it twice. Each time, I've liked it more and more. So yeah, Midnight Cowboy. Number 18. Number 17 is Gladiator, which I know a lot of people are like, oh, Braveheart versus Gladiator. For me, it's no question. Gladiator is 1,000 times better. I love Gladiator. I think it's a really well-done film. And I know I'm kind of biased with saying this, but I like the extended cut better. Even though the extended cut didn't win Best Picture, I still think the theatrical cut is still really, really good. Although the extended cut is better, in my opinion. But I love Gladiator. That's why I'm on 4K. Next up, number 16 is Amadeus. Similar to Gladiator, I own the director's cut. Now, to be fair, I have seen the theatrical cut for the first time when I first saw this movie. But ever since then, I've turned to the director's cut. The director's cut is, as this critic on the back says, about as close to perfection as movie gets. It's great. It's great. It's great filmmaking. Theatrical cut's still great as well. But my goodness, the director's cut. And I know it's kind of like, well, the director's cut didn't win Best Picture, but it is still that Best Picture winner, just with 20 minutes added. Amadeus, I love it, man. It's great. Next up, that was number 16. Next up, number 15 is Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. Love this film. Love it. Powerhouse film. Alejandro Inarritu Gonzalez killed it with this film. Great film. Great film. Next up, oh, sorry, I almost forgot my place. Next up, number 14 is Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. This trilogy I picked up on 4K. I actually got it for a Christmas present. And I'm looking forward to watching it in 4K again. But Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, at one point, was my favorite film of all time. It's not now, but it's still a great film. I still really dig it. And honestly, it's crazy the fact that a fantasy film won Best Picture. But I'm very happy that it did, honestly. It was a well-deserved win. Next up, that was my number 14. Next up, number 13 is 12 Years a Slave. Emotional, hard-hitting, very effective. Not a film you watch too many times, but when you do, it's so worth your time, man. When you watch it, you just sit down and you're kind of like, this is what filmmaking is all about. That's all there is to it. So that was my number 13. Next up, my number 12 is $1 Million Baby. I love this film. I really do. I'm hoping it gets like a 4K transfer because the Blu-ray, it's not amazing per se, but I think that also has to do with the fact that the cinematography is very dark. I remember in one of my filmmaking classes, I learned about the cinematography with how dark it was and how it wasn't one of those things where it was like the Blu-ray's fault. It was actually Clint Eastwood's like intention to make the cinematography that dark, which I can respect and appreciate because, I mean, the movie is a very dark tone, so it makes sense. But I do want to see this on 4K. I really like this film. I think it's very, very well made. One of my favorites, to be honest. Yeah, $1 Million Baby's number 12. Next up, number 11. I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, this should have been in top 5, but my number 11 just missed top 10, and my number 11 is Parasite. I love Parasite. Parasite's incredible. It's another example of what filmmaking is all about, but more importantly, it was the first, honestly, international film to win Best Picture. And for that front alone, I'm like, yes, we finally have a film like that. Parasite's great. It's a film I can see myself watching many more times. I've already seen it 4 or 5 times. I love this film. It's great. And yeah, that's Parasite, number 11. Next up, number 10 is No Country for Old Men. Love this film. I do think, honestly, that, There Will Be Blood should have won Best Picture, but, I mean, both are masterpieces. I love No Country for Old Men. It's one of my favorite thrillers. Such a great film. Yeah, that's why it's my number 10. Next up, number 9 is Spotlight, which I've heard some people lately say that they think it's a standard, based on true story movie, but I think that's quite the opposite, honestly. I think the script really elevates the material and the directing it's not fancy, but the directing does such a good job of making it feel very realistic. And I think that's one of the big things about this movie that I appreciate was that it felt very realistic. It didn't feel preachy or anything. It was just telling it how it should be and how it's like, obviously you come to your own terms with what your thoughts are. And I like that approach. Also, the acting is very naturalistic. It's not really showy or anything, but it does such a great job of really getting you immersed in this environment. And that also is backed up by the production design. Love Spotlight. Think it's a masterpiece. Yeah, that's my number 9. Next up, number 8 is The Godfather, Part 2. This movie is long, yes, but it is also very effective. It is one of the best sequels ever made, and what can I say? I love this film. Yeah, that's why it's my number 8. Next up, number 7 is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I love this film. This is such a great film. It's very funny, it's very dramatic, it's sad, but it just works so well. It somehow manages to balance all these different genres with ease. This is a great example of yet another film where I can say, this is what filmmaking is all about. Yeah, that is my number 7. Next up, my number 6 is Unforgiven. Another Clint Eastwood film makes this list higher up And kind of like Million Dollar Baby, I think that Unforgiven is a very dark-looking film intentionally. And with it being intentionally dark, it is one of those films where you can almost argue saying like, oh my goodness, like I don't like that, it's so dark. But if you look at the tone and the way that Clint Eastwood tells the stories, it makes sense, honestly. And I personally really dig it. I also just love how this is a story that easily could have been simple, but with the way Eastwood directs it, it really is elevated. And it also helps that the performances are off the charts. I love Unforgiven. That's why it's the number 6. Also, it's a genre film, and a genre film won Best Picture. Love it. So that's my number 6. Next up, my number 5 is The Silence of the Lambs. Love this film. Doesn't get any better than Silence of the Lambs. I'm speechless when I think about this movie, man. It's great. It really is great. Next up, number 4 is Moonlight. Look, Moonlight, when I first saw it, I thought it was just good, but the more I watch it, the more I realize it is a masterpiece and one of the best films I think I've seen. Every single time I watch it too, I pick up more and more on like little nuances of the filmmaking. And honestly, it's great to see that this film won Best Picture. It was groundbreaking when it won Best Picture. I think it's going to age very well. Honestly, 4 or 5 years later, I think it's still as impactful as it was when it first came out. And honestly, I hope more and more people watch this movie because obviously it's a smaller film, so not too many people have seen it. But hopefully, because it won Best Picture, years from now, people, return to it and be like, oh, wow, that was a great film. So, yeah, it's my number 4. Next up, my number 3 is The Godfather. The first one. Godfather, I love. It was one of the films as a 16, 17-year-old that really impacted me. And honestly, the more I watch it, the more I just notice how ahead of its time it was and how it kind of set the template for a lot of things. It really is a great film. It's long, but everything is purposeful with that. It's very meticulous. This is a great film, honestly, and so unpredictable. I couldn't imagine watching this movie when it came out in 72 because most of these actors weren't too well known. So to see them that they're not too well known and to see some of the things that happen to these characters, it probably was a huge surprise. Obviously, some of this is embedded in pop culture for people watching for the first time. They probably know some of these things, kind of like Empire Strikes Back. Without a twist or two with that movie, people know because of pop culture. But Godfather, I love it, man. We're at the final 2, guys. Number 2 is Schindler's List. Love this film. Love it. It's a great film. It really is. I don't watch it too much. I think I've seen it like half a dozen times. But when I do, it's a film that I can't help but be immersed in. For almost 3 hours and 20 minutes, I'm immersed. Steve Zalen did a great job with the script. Steven Spielberg did a great job with the directing, and all the performances, all the attention to details are all immaculate. Love Schindler's List. So that's my number 2. Now my number 1, the Best Picture winner of all time for me personally, and I know that a lot of people are probably going to be booing or being like, what? Or for other people, it's like, oh yeah, of course, Chad. My number 1 is American Beauty, which still waiting for a 4K release for this, but probably won't because of the Kevin Spacey scandal. But look, you have to sometimes, well, you don't have to, but you should. You should be able to separate the personal life of someone versus the art. And I think that this film, when you look at it as art, it's great. It's a masterpiece. It's a film that works. It balances comedy and drama so well, and there's a lot of pathos to it as well in terms of actually having a lot of depth. Despite obviously have that whole look closer, tagline. I think that tagline is very effective because when you do look closer at this movie, you realize there's a lot to take in and a lot to appreciate. I love this film. Again, hoping it gets a 4K release, but alas, here we are. It's just on Blu-ray. But yeah, it's a great film. So guys, that is every single Best Picture winner ranked by yours truly. Obviously, as I said earlier in this video, if you want a more in-depth breakdown of each film, you can check out the ranking of per decade down below. And as always, guys, I want to hear your ranking of every Best Picture winner. If you've seen every single one, if not currently, what every single one you've seen, rank it down below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Lift the subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.